Welcome back to Black Poets Then and Now. My name is Kara Roseborough, and today we are talking about poet, singer, memoirist, civil rights activist, director, movie composer, and all-around Renaissance woman Maya Angelou. Angelou was born Marguerite Ann Johnson in 1928 in St. Louis, Missouri. She was the second child of Bailey Johnson, a doorman and Navy dietitian, and Vivian Johnson, a nurse and car dealer. Her older brother, Bailey, was credited with giving her the nickname of Maya. When she was just 3 years old, her parents divorced. Maya went back and forth between living with her mother and her grandmother. When she was 8 years old, she and her brother, Bailey, were living with her mother at the time. Maya was raped by her mother's boyfriend, Freeman. Maya told her older brother, who told the rest of their family. Freeman was arrested and convicted, although he only served 1 day in jail. After being released a few days later, he was murdered, possibly by Angelou's uncles. For 5 years after that, Angelou fell silent. She became mute. Speaking on her silence later, she said that she felt by identifying her attacker she had killed him, and she was afraid of the power of her own voice, fearing that she could kill somebody else with her voice. It took family friend and teacher Bertha Flowers to help Maya regain her speaking ability. During this time, Maya deepened her love of literature and books, and she gained an incredible memory. Flowers introduced Angelou to poets and writers such as William Shakespeare and Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, and she also introduced her to iconic Black artists. When Angelou was 14 years old, she and her brother moved to Oakland, California to live with their mother. Angelou received a scholarship to study dance and acting from the California Labor School. When she was 16, she became the first Black female cable car conductor in San Francisco. She only held the job for a short time, but made history nonetheless. At age 17, shortly after graduating from high school, she gave birth to her son, Clyde Johnson, who later changed his name to Guy Johnson. In 1951, she married her first husband, Greek electrician and aspiring musician Tosh Angelos. They were married for just a short time, divorcing in 1954. During their marriage, though, Angelou's mother greatly disapproved of their interracial relationship. During the 1950s, Angelou continued her dance studies. She studied African dance in New York and in San Francisco teamed up with renowned dancer and choreographer Alvin Ailey. The two started their own dance troupe, Al and Rita, and performed for various Black fraternity organizations throughout the San Francisco area. They weren't very successful with the dance troupe, eventually disbanding, but created a wonderful friendship and partnership. Angelou danced professionally in nightclubs throughout the latter half of the 1950s, adopting her stage name, Maya Angelou, as part of her Calypso act. In 1959, she met novelist John Oliver Killens, who encouraged her to move to New York so she could focus on her writing. She did, and ended up joining the Harlem Writers Guild. In 1960, she met and befriended Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. After meeting him, she and Killens formed the Cabaret of Freedom to support the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. During this time, Angelou began her anti-apartheid and pro-Castro activism. In 1961, she and her son moved to Cairo with her partner, activist Vusumzi Make. While in Cairo, she served as the associate editor of the Arab Observer. After her relationship with Make ended, she and her son moved to Ghana for him to pursue his collegiate studies. Unfortunately, he got into a car accident, and they spent the next 4 years there as part of his recovery. During this time, Angelou worked as an administrator for the University of Ghana. She also worked as an editor for the African Review. She worked with Ghana's National Theater and was a freelance writer for the Ghanaian Times. While in Africa, Angelou met and befriended activist Malcolm X. Upon returning to the United States, she helped him form the Organization for Afro-American Unity. She was devastated by Malcolm X's assassination and fell into a period of depression. Helping her out of that period of depression was writer and longtime friend James Baldwin. He would come to Angelou's aid again after losing her friend, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., on her birthday in 1968. That same year, at a dinner party, she met Random House editor Robert Loomis, who, after giving her a challenge, encouraged her to write an autobiography. She was encouraged again by James Baldwin and got to work on her autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, published in 1969. She received critical acclaim for this work, which was a coming-of-age autobiography that showed the triumph of will over racism and trauma through love of literature. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings was the first nonfiction bestseller by a black woman. In 1972, she became the first black woman to have her screenplay produced. Her film, Georgia, Georgia, was produced by a Swedish company and shot in Sweden. She went on to compose for movies, write TV scripts, documentaries, short stories, and of course, poetry. Angelou published 36 books during her lifetime, including numerous collections of poetry. Some of her most famous collections include Just Give Me a Cool Drink of Water Before I Die, published in 1971 and nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Oh, Pray My Wings Are Gonna Fit Me Well, published in 1975. And Still I Rise, published in 1978. Shaker, Why Don't You Sing, published in 1983. I Shall Not Be Moved, published in 1990. And Even the Stars Look Lonesome, published in 1997. During the 1970s, Angelou received a nomination for a Tony Award, an Emmy Award, and over 30 honorary degrees from colleges and universities all across the world. Angelou's poetry was known for her various subject matters, which included Black beauty, the strength of black women and the human spirit, criticizing the Vietnam War, and demanding social justice for all. Often, her poetry is more lauded for the subject matter than for its actual poetic virtue. On her own work, Angelou said, "In my work and everything I do, I mean to say that we human beings are more alike than we are unalike, and to use that statement to break down the walls we set between ourselves because we are different." In 1993, Angelou performed her poem on the pulse of morning at the inauguration of former President Bill Clinton, making her the first poet to do a recitation at a presidential inauguration since Robert Frost at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. She continued her artistic and political career throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, teaching, lecturing across the country, making public appearances, and more, including directing, one of her lifelong goals. In 2014, after a series of health complications, Angelou died at the age of 86. With a legacy like this, it feels like we're not really doing her justice in talking about it in such a short amount of time. I encourage you to look up more about her life, as there is so much more than we were able to talk about today. To end our segment, I'd like to talk about one of her iconic poems, Caged Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sun. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade wind soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream, his wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. All right, let's unpack. This poem is a comparison between a free bird and a caged bird, and is an extended metaphor comparing and contrasting the unoppressed to the oppressed. With the unoppressed, Angelou illustrates the privilege and entitlement that this group of people has, birds have, versus the suffering and emotional resilience needed and displayed by the oppressed in this country. We can take the image of the caged bird, borrowed possibly from Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem Sympathy, to represent the African American community, digging into one of the first themes of this poem, oppression and the African American experience. When the caged bird sings, the song can allude to African American spirituals, which date back to slavery time. In those times, singing was not necessarily an expression of joy, but rather an indicator of pain, meant to send a message, something lying underneath the surface of these seemingly joyful and simple songs. We can take that here and compare it to the song that the caged bird sings. The caged bird is singing in the midst of pain and anger and rage and captivity as a way to cope with the current situation. Related to that first theme is the theme of freedom versus captivity. Again, we have an uncaged bird and a caged bird. We have one bird that is free, continuously free, and we see how that freedom leads to more freedom, versus the bird that's in captivity remains in that captivity, sees that there's something beyond, feels that there's something greater than the oppression that they're feeling, and is singing out this cry for help, this way to cope with their circumstances, but isn't able to break free of that, while the other bird not only continues in their freedom, but becomes entitled to that freedom. Moving on to our third theme, also related, is the theme of freedom as something that's universal and also natural, that it is a given right among all living things to want to be free. And the poem argues this by saying that the caged bird sings of things unknown but longed for. That thing being freedom, it's not sure what it looks like, what it feels like, but it knows that there is something greater than being caged, than being locked up, than being oppressed. We don't really know, we never really see the two birds interact. It's not like the caged bird sees the free bird and goes, oh, I want to be that. It just knows that there's something out there, something unknown that is better than their current circumstances. In this, the poem argues against the inhumane cruelty of oppression by saying that it's the natural biological instinct of all living things to want to be free. Let's revisit an element of poetry that we've talked about in the past, repetition. So you may have noticed that the third stanza and the sixth stanza are exactly the same. It reads, "The caged bird sings with fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom." Repeat it twice. This acts like a chorus to a song here, and we happen to be talking about singing as well. But there's another point of repetition that happens as well, which happens in the second stanza and the fifth stanza. So we have, in the second stanza, "But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing." And then we repeat those last two lines in the fifth stanza. "His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing." I think that's such a haunting image. Angelou doesn't say opens his mouth to sing, she says opens his throat. It becomes suddenly a much more visceral image, an image that depicts more of the struggle of the physical effort by saying the throat rather than just the mouth. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode on Maya Angelou. Her life, her work has left an incredible mark on this world, inspiring innumerable artists, including our own artistic director at Fleetwood-Jourdain Theater, to write Maya's last poem. Tune in on Thursday for more poetry. Until then, stay safe and stay creative. Bye!